Hello and welcome to BRAIDAR, the Business of Beauty. My name is Jaden Paru and you are here listening to the final episode of the semester. I know, right? It's been an amazing ride and I think it's really gone by quickly. Can't believe it's now like the last one for now, at least. But yeah, today is going to be a very interesting episode because today we are going to talk about a subset of, I guess, the whole franchise tie-in, like IP optimization that we were talking about in the previous two episodes, but we're talking about the reverse of that. So when you start with a product and then you spin it out into like different shows, movies based on that, and then how, if a brand is in that position, how they can leverage what they're like trying to do, based on their like business objectives and based on it starting with the product, how that looks different from if you're starting with the IP and creating products from that. So yeah, the vehicles that we're going to use to talk about that will be none other than the iconic Monster High and Ever After High doll lines. And I think they're really interesting to explore because for those who don't know or aren't familiar, Monster High is a line of dolls that was created by Mattel in 2010, and it's all about these monsters who are the children of like famous creatures, monsters, myths, and stuff. They all go to the same high school, which is called Monster High. And it's basically all about like self-expression, loving who you are, about fashion, about friendship. It's really touching on those themes that that Bratz was celebrating in their sort of like when they were created, what the crux of their like differentiating factor was. And Ever After High is the another doll brand that was started by Mattel in 2013 rather. And they have kind of like the high school for the children of like different myths as well, but not so much like monsters, more so like fairy tales, like stories, legends in terms of like folklore and things like that. But definitely the more, I guess, innocuous of those, like creatures, they'd be in Ever After High. So you have like Sleeping Beauty's daughter, you have Snow White's daughter, you have Cinderella's children, like all that kind of stuff. So basically, if you can imagine Disney descendants, Ever After High did it first, actually. I know that's a contentious thing. I know this will actually come back in like to be an important factor, this whole like descendant similarity. But yeah, those are the kind of vehicles that we're going to use to talk about how a brand can kind of create a strategy around that. And particularly, I'm going to use this to pepper in a bit about like in-person brand activations, which are basically like pop-ups that brands do. Like if a brand is centered on like products, like items, the pop-up that they create is trying to like bring customers into the feeling behind the like identity or positioning of that item. So like, for example, I'm trying to think of a really cool example, if like there's a whole thing about Coachtopia, which is like Coach's secondhand, like not renewable fashion, but cyclic. How do you say that? Like fashion that has a very like sustainable life cycle. Yeah, that's their like brand for that, and it's aimed at Gen Z, particularly like young women. So Coachtopia is basically their like brand identity behind that initiative, and Coachtopia has in-person pop-ups where it's like a physical like store or like set up where customers can interact with different stations or different activities that underpin the ethos of like renewable fashion and like thrifting and repurposing like vintage items and just that whole thing that underpins like the rise of Depop and vintage and thrifting being like really cool and fashionable. So yeah, it's just another way for them to kind of um, cement themselves in that space, and I think it's really effective, especially if you've got a franchise type thing that you've tied your product to, or if you've got like if you're trying to link the franchise that you've spun out of your product back to the product, you know? So, yeah. But anyway, to kind of set the scene, I want to take you guys back to around 2001 when a former Mattel employee called Carter Bryant had the idea to do something different. He sat down one day and sketched the designs for four dolls, and these girls would go on to become the Bratz. Now, obviously, in kind of coming from that Mattel like ecosystem, that was sort of an avenue for Mattel to hit back at Bratz. And you know how in episode 2, when I was talking about how Bratz gained steam, the traction behind Bratz, what made Bratz so sort of disruptive and impactful on the zeitgeist at that time. I unpacked that all in episode 2, so if you want to know more about that, you can head over and listen to it. But basically, the more that they gained traction, and the fact that the creator's genesis was like from Mattel, that was grounds for Mattel to kind of counter that and try and hinder that with a lawsuit. And the whole Mattel versus MGA, and by the way, MGA is the company that went on to like produce the Bratz dolls. So the whole Mattel versus MGA thing was like dragged out in court. It was dragged out in sort of public sentiment where the media especially kind of tried to frame the whole like discourse and the whole contention as, are you like, there's a Barbie side, which is the establishment, which is like, yes, it has problems for like presenting a certain image of like embodied femininity that is not necessarily realistic, but it still represented that establishment and that traditional sort of relatively wholesome American value of like that way of presenting femininity is acceptable, even if it is admittedly like it's not on the whole constructive. But then on the other side, they framed it like, are you on that Barbie side, or are you on the Bratz side, which is like the rebellious, the sort of scandalous, the like pushing the envelope but not in a good way, the bad influence type of sassy type of, I think that whole like anti quote unquote urban sentiment also creeps into this sort of rhetoric where it's like you're positioning this acceptable form of femininity, which is notably a very white form of femininity, and you're juxtaposing it against this other sort of embodied kind of identity, embodied feminine identity, which you are characterizing as like sort of devious and unacceptable and immoral and sort of inherently scandalous in not conforming to that tradition. And also like, I guess being too like in that it just harkens back to the whole thing of like something that's considered outside of that normative normative presentation, that all those other things are considered like less than, just because they're not like, I don't even know how to describe it, but it's just an interesting characterization of urban equals bad, or urban equals like not dirty but like less than, or like unproper, unclean, you know? Like I just think that's quite weird, which I don't have to explain that to you guys. You probably you know, hopefully would concur. But I think it's important to set that background for this discussion because the whole Mattel and MGA feud actually also played out not just in the courts and not just in the court of public opinion through like the discourse in the newspapers and in parent like forums where they kind of have this echo chamber of certain ideas, but also in the actual product development and like sale of future doll lines. So the product development back and forth, you could say that the Ever After High and the Monster Highs of the world, which, as I said before, both Monster High and Ever After High were created by Mattel, that's Barbie's parent company, they are undeniably influenced by Bratz. As I said in episode 2, the mold for like the heads, the bodies, the fact that their heads are so big, the fact that their feet are so big, the sort of non-naturalistic eye size, the whole like just the inherent to the actual materiality of like how you put this toy together, the design is, you cannot say that it's not like influenced by it. So they kind of through those brands, which are like separate from the Barbie brand, Mattel was able to kind of counter the success, or rather try and like encroach on the success of Bratz in that whole like, we are the doll that gives you this sense of a different kind of expression and a sort of like edgier, sassier kind of expression and kind of way of presenting what it means to engage with fashion and to engage with like self sort of acceptance. The two newer brands that I'm talking about in this episode allowed Mattel to do that without, quote unquote, sacrificing the integrity of the Barbie brand as it stands as like this bastion of tradition, but which is in itself is a kind of contradictory thing, because I'm not going to go into it in this episode because it's going to take more than an episode to like really unpack it. But Barbie at the moment, they have done just that. They've like changed the core like Barbie output, like in terms of the types of, there's like so many types of Barbies that they make, right? So they've actually adjusted the core Barbie output to reflect some of these MGA dolls. And so it's just like, well, you're doing it now. You didn't want to do it before. It's like, what changed, But even though I do know what changed, and I can sort of explain it a little bit as I go along, but I won't get too much into it because that's, again, going off topic. So, yeah. So what the Ever After Highs and the Monster Highs allowed Mattel to do was to kind of explore what it means to have this sort of non-naturalistic approach to the whole like fashion-related sense-making that dolls are kind of created around, like that dolls hinge upon, right? So it's like, what if we took this whole pushing the envelope that Bratz is doing and we push it further, but in ways that still conform with our like overall brand identity and like as Mattel, like as a company. And I think going with the fairy tale route and going with the like mythical creatures, monsters route allowed Mattel to do that in a way that's still like, I think that still links it back to kid-ishness. Like, like fairy tales, like things that are fantasy, fables, is still like codified with things that are associated with childhood. And I think that's what made them still that's what made them acceptable under the Mattel umbrella, like sitting beside the traditionalism of Barbie. Oh yeah, by the way, I should also say that under Barbie at this time, it's not like they were keeping to that very like 20th century, very like, how do I say, like Gen X conception of what Barbie is and what Barbie like looks like, because they did explore the like My Scene line, which that's a whole other episode, because I think My Scene did something very interesting. And again, My Scene's almost like a hybrid between Bratz and Barbie, like literally again in the materiality of like the molds that they use to to shape the plastic of the dolls and like the head size, the eye size, everything like that, and like the fashion as well. It's definitely taking cues from like the realism and attention to detail and the actual like tailoring that Bratz championed. But again, that's a whole other episode. Perhaps next semester I'll do these other episodes. But yeah, I just thought it would be useful to mention it, because I'm not trying to characterize it like, oh, Bratz was frozen in time and then Mattel did all these other cool things around. I mean, Barbie was frozen in time, then Mattel did all these cool things around it. It's not that simple. But yeah. Also, I just like talking about like these topics, so that's why. So yeah, and I think basically at the time, like 2010 to 20, I'll give it to 2016. Monster High and Ever After High were reigning. They were reigning kind of concurrently with Barbie, because obviously, like as the market leader and having so much like the saturation of that brand is like not really something that I think can be like, you know, erased or overthrown just by like a challenger like so quickly. But they were reigning alongside Barbie, and obviously since all three are under Mattel, that means Mattel is reigning. So yeah, that was the kind of landscape, and especially in that time, that whole like 2010 to 2016, and I'm being kind of generous going up to 2016. But crucially, as I don't think I pointed this out in episode 2, although I might have, but Bratz was actually on the downturn in that era. And I think I did touch on this in that episode, because I remember talking about the reasons why, because Bratz, they did a number of things that I think they were trying to keep up with the changing tastes of their target audience. And you know, that whole kind of like going into 2013, 14, that whole like randomness Tumblr era, like mustache, pizza, all that type of that whole like that thing, that way of being had a grip on the zeitgeist of like tweens in that era. I'm not saying that that is bad. Like obviously it's a very interesting time, but honestly I think it was a fun time. It was fun. But I think in Bratz trying to tap into that whole way of being kind of is contradict, or like it doesn't really align with the way that Bratz was conceived, which is like somehow it's not as like it's, I don't know, it's just different. If I kind of go into why it's different, I'll take up too much time. But basically it's different because Bratz was always sort of aloof, even though Bratz were about like passion for fashion, friendship, self-expression. They also had this aloof and like cool quality to them. Whereas the Tumblr, mustache, randomness era is all about like relatability and about like almost like not self-deprecating, but like acknowledging that you have like weird aspects to yourself and goofy aspects. And I don't think Bratz and goofy go together. Like I don't think the two concepts should be mixing, because it kind of undermines the brand. And I think that played out in the kind of like fashion packs and the kind of dolls that were coming out from Bratz at the time. Like they even changed the designs of the Bratz dolls to be more like, I don't even know what you would call it, like more, I suppose I could say whimsical. But then that aesthetic just didn't match with the whole like, it just didn't go. The concept didn't mix, and it showed in the sales, and it showed in the kind of like lack of like Bratz movies. The output was not, it was non-existent in that era. It showed in the fact that like the salience of Bratz as a brand was not up to scratch in that era. And so that gap that those decisions created allowed, again, for Monster High and Ever After High to occupy the space of that Barbie alternative. But crucially, Mattel owns the Barbie and they own the alternative. They own the establishment and the challenger. So it's kind of like they've got this monopoly going. So that was quite interesting. And I think as well, another thing that allowed Monster High and Ever After High to reign was the fact that they were so closely tied to their web series. Now, if you were on like YouTube in that era, and I guess you were like their target audience, you'd kind of get recommended their animated web series where you follow the lives of the girls. Like in Monster High, for example, there was like Frankie, who's like Frankenstein's daughter. There was like Cleopatra. There was a werewolf girl, Draculaura. Don't even get me started on Draculaura, because I think, like, yeah, I think just even now, like the kind of social currency that these characters have is like evidence of the fact that they were so popular, and that the vehicle of a web series was so effective in communicating, like, what's the personality behind this doll, like behind this like facet of the brand. And so in going from like product to IP, rather than like, in the other episodes I was talking about IP to product, going from product to IP allows you to kind of flesh out the personality of whatever like characters your like product is meant to like represent, which is something that your audience will kind of appreciate and then be able to kind of enjoy as a fandom, rather than like just a consumer base of a product. And so again, like that whole idea of getting a flywheel going, because obviously like fandoms, there's a sense of affinity, a sense of investment in the story and the character's development that drives consumption further. Same thing with like singers. That's the reason why their fans are buying merch, their fans are buying tickets to concerts, because they're trying to complete the star image. They're trying to like get closer to their idea, and they're constantly trying to make sense of the object of their like fandom. And so that the only way to do that is to keep on consuming stuff about them and consuming like their output or their products. So yeah, super effective. Another thing Monster High did that I think is really cool is that they did the whole virtual avatar like angle on their website, because their website like augmented the series and the products in that it gave you like written bios of the dolls as if it was like them writing it. So you could kind of inject a bit of personality in those write-ups while literally like advertising the doll, because underneath it would be like buy now, So it's literally like tying that whole sense of narrative and sense making into an advert or into like an online shopping experience, which I think is pretty cool. And then they also had a place on the website where you could like make your own like Monster High persona. And the way that the dress up game girls were all about that, the way that tapped into the whole, I said it before, I said it in episode 3 about like virtual worlds, dress up games and all that. It taps into that sense of this is an avenue or a channel for my personal self-expression. And because it's aligning with this brand, then I therefore feel this affinity with this brand. I can imagine myself walking through the hallways of Monster High. I can imagine myself as whatever creature I want to be. I can even like overlay my own personal like culture or interests onto that experience, because I can make a creature that's like based on my own folklore or based on, I don't know, maybe a story that you made up. You can literally make an OC on that whole like mini game, and you can save it and you can like share it with friends and like put the background as if you're in Monster High and stuff like that. And it was really, really detailed. It was actually comparable to Create a Sim, like in Sims 4, how you can like adjust each feature and it's all like technical and it's all that. It was really impressive, actually. It was really impressive. And I think the fact that it maps onto like things like Create a Sim again reinforces that sense of like it's a simulation of life, and that this game is meant to like be something that you can immerse yourself in and that you can use for like role playing as a character in Monster High. And so again, it's strengthening that bond that they have to the brand. Yeah. So that was awesome. I think I still have some that my sister and I created on my old laptop. So that's really fun. And yeah, Monster High had movies. So not only did Monster High have the web series, Monster High had movies. And when I tell you that Boo York is one of the best movie musicals out there, I'm not taking any like criticism on that. I'm not taking, comments, notes. No, it's just it's a fact. It's an indisputable thing, because I feel like the movies just, again, they reinforce a sense of like this brand, this product has something behind it, that when I buy it, I can kind of tap into these adventures that I've seen on the screen. And crucially, for Monster High, the movies are kind of in a different universe to the series. Like they don't really, like, the characterization is different. Some people's characters are different. Like the events of the series are not necessarily like what happens in the movies. And so I think again that that lowers the barrier to entry for new consumers. And so because movies, obviously you can like buy a DVD in Sainsbury's when you're like going shopping with your parents and you're at the till. You know, you used to be able to buy like DVDs. So a lot of people bought Monster High DVDs that way. And because the movies didn't need any like background research or like homework, you know how like if things are too interconnected, you have to watch all the other ones to understand the new ones. And I'm not like I'm referring to any franchise or anything when I say that, but yeah, but because it had that low barrier to entry, it meant that these new like kids who are watching it could immediately like hook onto these characters and feel like that affinity for them, and then you get them straight in the funnel in terms of like you've progressed them through the beginning of the funnel of like awareness to actually like intention to buy in a quicker way than if they had to start from, okay, I'll watch the web series and then I'll watch, you know, movie 1, movie 2, movie 3. Like, it's not like that. So I think especially for kids, that approach works really well. And yeah, they also had books. Monster High had books, but again, the books are in their own universe, which is separate from the TV series and the movies, which again is, I guess, like another way of lowering the barrier to entry and just making sure that I think it's quite nice to have like a fresh experience of the same like IP. Like it's the same thing that underpins like fan sort of reconceptualizations of like a franchise or a character or an IP. It's like you know the crux of it, the core of it, but you want to experience it in different like scenarios or alternate universes and things like that. So yeah, and that was Monster High, right? And okay. Before I talk about Ever After High, I have to mention the Monster High theme songs. The Monster High theme songs. Okay, so they had the original one, which is like I don't know how to explain it, but I think it's kind of got that slightly more creepy, edgy feeling to it than the newer one, which was like in 2013 that Madison Beer sang, which is like, we are monsters, we are proud. The old one was like, monster, monster high, that one. So, but I think it's interesting how both of them, the fandom and like the zeitgeist have kind of embraced them, so to the point where if you sing that to someone, they know like how they can continue it with you, and it's like that call and response effect. And as you're doing that, you already have an idea of like what the person is trying to communicate, like in terms of like the values of the brand and like that whole, I don't know, it's just like lightning in a bottle. It's just it's something that it's not easy to explain, but is again a lived experience that you can share with other people, which I think is cool. And on the Ever After High side, again they had books and they had a web series and they had theme songs, and you do get that sense of like shared sense making, lightning in a bottle, but they didn't have movie. They had like specials in their web series, like longer episodes, but they didn't have like movies. And but one thing about Ever After High, even though they didn't have movies, they had the like bios on their website and everything and stuff like that. And what the bios did that tied into the series and that made up for not having like movies was the lore. When I tell you Ever After High lore was going crazy, when I tell you Ever After High lore did not have to go that hard, I'm not going to spoil it for anyone because I think it's still worth like having a look if you're interested. But Ever After High invested in their web series and invested in character development, in having like different episodes and plot beats actually matter for like the greater sort of story arc. They did that. And I think that also drove the like toy sales to an extent. Although I don't know if Ever After High toys were like the dolls were as popular as Monster High dolls, but I definitely know that the fandom like loved the series and what was happening with the characters, because it's all about this. It's not so much about fashion and self-expression as it is about self like actualization, because the whole point of the school is about each person, like each child of a like fairy tale creature or person has to do this ceremony where they like accept their fate. Like they have to follow in their parents' footsteps. So like if your parent is Sleeping Beauty, you have to like you're expected to also go through that sleeping for 100 years thing. But then what the show did is explored the kind of what that does to the psyche of a character of a person when you're expected to do something that you don't necessarily want to do and that is not necessarily beneficial for you just because it helps out other people. Like there's this whole like symbiotic relationship between all the everyone's different stories where people need to fulfill their aspect of the story for someone else's aspect to be fulfilled. Like the main character is like the evil queen's daughter. That is like, Snow White has an evil queen. The evil queen's daughter and Snow White's daughter are roommates in the school because it's a boarding school, by the way. Yeah, and then Raven, who's the evil queen's daughter, she doesn't want to be like her mom. She's like, she's pushing back against that idea of like, just because I'm born into a certain family, I'm expected to do something. Like, no, you've not considered me as a person. You've not asked me what I want to do. Even if you ask me, you don't care. And then Apple, who's Snow White's daughter, because Snow White needs the evil queen to give her the apple, if Raven doesn't do that, Snow White can't do her own bit. I mean, Apple can't do her own bit. And Apple wants to fulfill her legacy. And so you've got this whole tension between the royals, who are the people who want to like adhere to the legacy, and the rebels who want to rebel against their legacies and like just do their own thing and be their own people, not bound by like what's written in the storybook about their family. And then Ever After High does such a good job of like really unpacking that and really making the lore of the show and of the world rich and interesting and like suspenseful. And I think they kind of play off the tropes of like different characters. Like you'd expect the Prince Charming character to be a certain way, but then they're not. And it's just, I think just using the vehicle of like teens in a high school, you can explore one archetype in different ways. Like for example, the Prince Charming character, the character archetype is split into 3 actual characters in Ever After High, and they're all siblings, and it's exploring like different deconstructions of the Prince Charming archetype. Like, I'm not trying to spoil it, so you can kind of watch it to understand what I'm talking about, but it's definitely really good. And this sense of lore is what I think drove the fandom and drove the like, it being Ever After High being up there in terms of like doll brands. And so, yeah, I think tying into like in-person brand activations, the actual, like a way that you can further reinforce this, like this affinity and like fire that's behind the brand, like on behalf of the fans, is that you can use in-person brand activations and pop-ups to reinforce the buying aspect. Like, so for example, if we're talking about Monster High in 2012, they could have done like a thing in a mall where you have a pop-up of like a Monster High hallway, and you make like an Instagram corner, or like, Instagram wasn't like so prevalent then, especially not among tweens, but still make a photo corner, do a thing where you can like, people can come dressed up as like, how basically Monster High, it's more part of the whole ethos is like remixing the school experience, but using monsters as a lens through which to do that. So like one of the characters, she wears like school uniform, but like, how you like funkify it and like put like safety pins, you put all this type of stuff on it, and you like cut this aspect and you like do this design on it. You can encourage fans to come in dressed like that, take pictures, like launch an exclusive doll in that pop-up. So you see the way the line will just like wrap around that the like food court or wherever you've cleared to kind of put your pop-up, or wrap around like the outside of the building. Because crucially, again, I say that they should have done this in 2013, or that like something like this could have worked in 2013, because again, it's about timing. It's about striking when the iron is hot, and that's how you can like make sure they will actually have a good impact. Because if they do it now as I'm going to touch on in a little bit, the fire has kind of gone down for a number of reasons, and the audience has grown up. So the approach has to slightly be different. So another thing, and I know our episode is almost over, which is super sad, but I wanted to touch on the actual waning period of their like reign as like the toys. And I have a whole bunch of stuff to talk about, but I've got like not enough time. But basically, the after 2016, I think the toy market, the toy like consumer climate kind of changed. This is something I bring up in like a lot of subjects, but the whole rise of, you know, on YouTube, right? Those people who like unbox toys, surprise egg unboxing, toy haul, doll, like if you have a younger sibling or younger cousin, you know what I'm trying to talk about, because the way that those things flooded the feed, the way those things flooded the algorithm, because obviously it's easy for kids to like passively kind of watch someone opening a toy, and because they get the dopamine hit of like seeing what that toy is and seeing like what it's like to play with it and putting themselves in their shoes. So it's nice like easy passive watching, and by extension it's nice easy passive views for the creators or content farms who were making it. And so it's just like everybody hopped on that. And crucially, as I said, the type of toys that were popularized by these unboxings, and therefore like popular in real life when the consumers wanted to imitate that and like experience it in real life, were surprise based toys. And by that I mean toys where you like, it's a circle or an egg, and you unravel the egg like one layer and you get like a little aspect of a toy, and you keep unwrapping layers and getting different little toys that either combine to make one toy or that are accessories for the main toy, which is at the heart of the egg. And that's one aspect of it. But there's also surprise toys that are like blind bags, which are like you just buy a bag that like it doesn't say what toy it is, but it comes with a list of like almost a catalog of what it could possibly be, and you open it to find out which collectible you get. So I think in 2016, this latter format was what was reigning through Shopkins. Shopkins are like miniature food items or like furniture or clothing items that have faces and look cute, and which were toys. Shopkins dominated. Shopkins kind of, and the blind bags tap into that almost like gambling type of compulsive behavior where you want to complete the set, but obviously you don't know how, like, there's no guarantee that your next purchase will get the one that you need to complete it. So it encourages this compulsive and continuous purchase of those products. And so for a long time, the doll side of toys could not respond to that, because obviously how are you going to put a doll like in a tiny bag? It's just like, it's so antithetical to the whole approach to selling dolls and to like merchandising fashion that dolls embodied, which is like having the clear plastic on the front and showing exactly what fashion accessories you get, and showing exactly what the doll looks like, and showing you that up front and highlighting it and, you know, emphasizing it. This is like the reverse where everything is concealed. So I think that, and combined with other factors like just changing consumer behavior in terms of like YouTube and other things replacing the kind of time that kids would dedicate to toys to an extent, it resulted in Ever After High and Monster High's influence waning. And you can kind of see that in the fact that Monster High, although they still come out with movies, it's all like Monster High has been consistently rebooted, like consistent wig rotation in terms of like changing the art style, changing the story, the lore, like clean slate to try and keep up with these changes. But I think the Monster High that was reigning ended after this movie called Great Scarier Reef. It's a Monster High movie, I think came out in 2017. But to be honest, I think for me it ended kind of like after Boo York, because that was the last like really really popular one that I know of. So yeah, and then Ever After High, particularly, it's kind of interesting because they did not have any like consistent reboots from Mattel. They only had this really cryptic message. It said like the storybook is closed, dot dot dot, for now. And for years, people have that was the last thing that they kind of posted on their like social at the time of like their whole demise, I suppose you could say. And for years, people have been saying like, oh, what like does that mean that they've got something planned? Or does that mean like the door is just kind of ajar for possible like resuscitation of the brand? But yeah, it's just again it's again showing you how Ever After High was all about adding like lore to the experience of engaging with these toys and adding a dimension of like solve the mystery sense like to the sense making of like the fans who engage with the toys. So I think it would be cool to say a bit about the legacy of Monster High and Ever After High, because again it ties back into the whole MGA versus Mattel back and forth like struggle, you know. It's a struggle that also involves like getting influence from the other person to try and undermine them, and then the other person gets influence from you, the thing that you were influenced on, to undermine you, and that whole thing goes back and forth. And this kind of manifested in the LOL Surprise dolls of 2016. And LOL Surprise are an MGA doll line. So it's going now from Mattel reigning to MGA reigning. And LOL Surprise was when MGA figured out how to surprise eggify dolls. They figured out how to deconstruct the different parts of a doll to fit into that format of, you know what I was saying, when you have a surprise egg, like a huge egg-shaped thing that the kid unwraps one layer, you get like a top. Unwrap another layer, you get a wig. Unwrap another layer, you get shoes. Till you get to the center of the egg, which is the actual doll that you put all those things onto. And so LOL Surprise was an MGA kind of cracked that code. And when I tell you that LOL Surprise was everywhere. LOL Surprise was in every shop, every kid's hands, every kid's home, every kid's screen, everywhere. LOL Surprise, I think, was bigger than Monster High and Ever After High, because again it's tapping into not only that sense of like it, because it's again with that like huge head huge eye kind of format, but also tapped into the sense of compulsive behavior of like the unwrapping and like mystery egg thing. So it's got that driving the actual sales of it and the actual consumption, but it's also got, in terms of the theming and the branding of the actual product, it's tapping into the whole sense of like each doll has a particular theme, which is kind of, it's almost like the antithesis of Bratz, but it's something that maps onto the later rise of aesthetics that the target audience would definitely latch onto, like in 2018 with the rise of like TikTok and like Pinterest going from like a Gen X mom kind of platform to a Gen Z kind of platform. Not that that's anything wrong with Gen X, but that's just what kind of happened in terms of like its sort of brand perception. But yeah, so LOL, they didn't have a web series, but they had songs, and the LOL songs are very good. I would recommend you listen to them. But yeah, so MGA was, it's really hard to emphasize how much LOL really was the, like, even against Barbie, because you know how before I said that the other ones were coexisting with Barbie. LOL eclipsed Barbie, and that is not an easy thing to do. But again, it's like the behaviors that the format of the product encouraged that I think helped that along, and the fact that it was tapping into this newer way of like self-expression through fashion in terms of like aesthetics and stuff. And when I say aesthetics, I mean like, you know, those grouped sort of symbolic like clothing pieces and styles and colors that are meant to communicate certain things, like cottagecore, princess core, Y2K, that kind of thing. Yeah, so really hard to emphasize the success of that, but it's interesting how at the moment I would say that Mattel is having their comeback moment in this back and forth, because they are coming out with the Rainbow High line. Like, They came out with it in 2020, actually. But basically, Rainbow High is taking on that whole trope of high school for X, with the X in this case being like performing arts and like fashion designing, like beats making, all the things that I think a Gen Z audience now are exploring through the like rise of the creator economy. But they're also tapping into the whole thing of like having a web series and like a narrative that draws consumers in, but this time they're using like drama and a kind of soap opera approach, which I think fits onto the like kind of YouTube like drama videos and the tea videos that the target audience is watching. But they definitely get inspiration from their predecessors and the Monster High and Ever After Highs of the world in terms of their non-naturalistic like skin colors, like you could be blue or pink or yellow skin, and the whole idea of like being based on a fantasy sort of conception of fashion and being based on like not like almost like whimsical, yeah, like fairy tale like designs. So yeah, could say a lot more about that, but we are actually out of time this week. I know, it's so sad, but I've had the best time hosting this radio show for you all, and I'm so happy that you've been listening along and following in my little thoughts about different things in the beauty and fashion like industries and how brands can tap into different aspects of fandom and consumer behavior that I think are quite interesting. Thank you so much for the support, and I hope to see you again very soon. Bye for now. I'm Jaden Paru.